the monk's chamber, silence spoke louder than screams. "Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them." Wolfe steps into the quiet. If you know Nero Wolfe, you know that anything interfering with his sacred lunch hour is doomed to fail. Between 12 and 2, the world could collapse into the Hudson, and he'd only notice if it splashed onto his beer. So when the knock came at precisely 12:15, I considered ignoring it out of loyalty to domestic order. Unfortunately, the knock didn't sound like one of those half-hearted, sorry-to-intrude taps. It was persistent, deliberate, and somehow polite all at once, like someone insisting they had a right to be ignored. Fritz, of course, had his hands full in the kitchen. The man treats soup like scripture, so I went to the door myself. On the stoop stood a tall fellow with a shaved head, wrapped in a dark overcoat that had probably never met a tailor. He wasn't just bald, he was shaved deliberately, with the kind of precision that says the barber had a rule book. His eyes were calm, but sharp enough to take inventory of the whole house through the crack in the door. "Mr. Wolfe," he said in a voice that carried quiet authority, "expects visitors at what hour?" "That depends," I told him. "If you're selling salvation, try 4 o'clock. If you're delivering lunch, Fritz will love you. Otherwise, it's a long shot." He didn't smile. "I am Brother Caedmon. I was told to come here. It concerns the Abbey of St. Paracletus." I've had my share of odd callers, from debutantes to hitmen, but I admit that name earned a blink. The Abbey was a small monastery upstate, famous for its vow of silence and its honey. It had also been in the papers recently over some inheritance dispute involving their land. "Fine," I said. "You can tell it to me. Mr. Wolfe's digestive tract is currently the only active case he's interested in." But the man didn't budge. He glanced past me, through me really, and said, "It cannot be said twice." That was new. Normally the nutcases at least repeated themselves. I considered the possibility that this guy was another crank drawn by Wolfe's reputation. Still, there was something about him. Controlled, measured. The kind of calm that hides dynamite. "Wait here," I said. When I entered the dining room, Wolfe had already looked up from his plate of lamb kidneys in Madeira sauce with the expression of a man asked to attend a barn fire during the opera. "Archie," he said, "if that is a salesman, have him executed on the stoop. If it is Inspector Kramer, tell him to consult his psychiatrist. Otherwise, no." "It's a monk," I said. That got him. One eyebrow rose, the Wolfe equivalent of a fainting spell. "A monk," he repeated. "In my house?" "On the doorstep. Name of Brother Caedmon. He claims it concerns the Abbey of St. Paracletus." Wolfe's fork paused mid-air. "An abbey of silence," he murmured. "Intriguing. Bring him in. Fritz will forgive Providence for its timing." When Brother Caedmon entered, Wolfe didn't rise naturally. He observed the man as he would a curious specimen, one eye narrowed, one finger resting on his chin. The monk bowed slightly, hands clasped. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "forgive the intrusion. I was told you do not leave your home. That is fortunate. What has left the Abbey cannot return." "I should hope not," Wolfe said dryly. "This house is not a revolving door. State your difficulty." The monk hesitated, his calm thinning. "There has been a theft. Not of gold nor money, of a room." Wolfe's eyes flickered. "A room?" "Yes," the monk said softly. "The silent room. It is gone. You could have heard Fritz drop a spoon in the kitchen." Wolfe frowned, which is like most men shouting. "Explain," he said. "The silent room," Brother Caedmon continued, "is a chamber of isolation, no window, no sound. It holds our vows, our history, our meditation. 2 nights ago, the door was found sealed from within. But when we broke it open, there was nothing inside. The walls had been stripped, the altar removed, the floor clean. as if it had never existed. But one of our brothers, he paused, is missing. Now that got Wolfe's full attention. A disappearance, he said, disguised as absence of place. Fascinating. I couldn't tell if he was impressed or insulted by the originality. Brother Caedmon added quietly, "We were told by a friend, an admirer of your work, that if we wished the truth without scandal, we should come to you." Wolfe sighed, long and heavy, as though the universe had personally demanded tribute. "Archie," he said, "inform Mr. Parker that his afternoon appointment must be rescheduled. Also, bring beer." I grinned. When Nero Wolfe asks for beer before the client has even made his pitch, it means one thing: he's already accepted the case. The monk inclined his head, silent again. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "Brother Caedmon," he said, "the removal of a man and a room from an institution of silence is a paradox. I detest paradoxes. Therefore, I am compelled." He opened his eyes and fixed me with a glance. "Archie, you will go to this abbey tomorrow. Speak with whomever has not taken a vow of idiocy. Bring me the names of all who had access to the silent room, and the one who is missing. Also—" He paused, nostrils flaring slightly. "Observe what remains when nothing remains. That is where the trail begins." And that was how a monk's missing room barged through Nero Wolfe's lunchtime and rearranged the piece of the brownstone. Brother Caedmon didn't drink the beer Fritz set in front of him. He touched the glass like it might confess something if he waited it out. Wolfe took his own in practiced swallows and watched the monk as if gauging the flow rate of a spring. "The missing brother," I said, notebook open because props keep people cooperative. "Name?" "Brother Matthew," Caedmon replied. "He tended the bees. He had the keys to the silent room every Thursday at dusk to clean and replenish the candles." "Was he the one found missing when the door was opened?" I asked. "Yes." "By whom?" "Brother Caedmon," Wolfe murmured, "is sufficient pronoun for himself. Spare him the catechism until we have context." He rubbed his forefinger along the rim of the glass. "Brother, this inheritance dispute—" "Condense it." Caedmon obeyed without motion to spare. "A benefactor, Miss Lydia Vale, died last year. In her will, she left us a parcel adjoining the Abbey's North Grove. Her nephew contests. He says Miss Vale promised the parcel to an arts foundation he manages. There is to be a hearing next week." "A fight over ground," Wolfe said, and suddenly a man and a room evaporate. Tuh, even monks have neighbors. "Miss Vale ever visit the abbey?" I asked. "Often," he said. "She loved the bees. She sat in the garden on Tuesdays, always with the same book." "Title?" He looked at me as if I'd asked what number his soul wore. I never saw. It had a red cloth cover. "Useful?" I muttered. Wolfe flicked me a cautionary glance that meant, "There's meat in the broth. Don't salt yet." "Who recommended me?" Caedmon hesitated. "A man who sells us jars for honey. He admires you." Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, which I've learned is his version of a shrug. "Archie will visit tomorrow. You will leave a list of brothers, your steward or bursar, and any lay people with keys. You will add the nephew and the Arts Foundation with addresses." Caedmon inclined his head. "Thank you." We might have resumed lunch in peace then, but peace had other errands. The bell went again, this time at the inhospitable hour of 1 o'clock, with a staccato that meant business had put on heels. I went. On the stoop was a woman in a navy suit that could pass for armor, with a face that had spent time disciplining city boards and cousins. She didn't wait for an invite. She offered a card, and her gaze together like a matched set. "Lydia Vale," the card said beneath a flourish. I suspect it had bullied many envelopes. And below that, in smaller print, "Estate of." "I'm Caro Vale," she said. "Executor. I hear a monk came here." "Either the grapevine has a siren or you've been casing our block," I said. Which is it? Both, she said evenly. May I come in, Mr. Goodwin? I prefer not to say my business to the geraniums. I let her in because her shoes kept time like a metronome, and I dislike wasted rhythm. In the office, she took in Wolfe, the monk, the globe, and the orchid room door with the appraisal of someone, selecting a chessboard. She nodded once, as if we made the cut. Mr. Wolfe, she said, I oppose spectacle. The Abbey is already a whispering gallery. If they've engaged you, I request that whatever you learn discreetly. Miss, my aunt, did not like fights. She liked finishes. A likable preference, Wolfe said. Sit, Miss Vale. Miss Vale, she corrected, taking the red chair. She didn't quail under his look, which was something. My cousin Marcus heads the Aurelian Arts Foundation. He argues the parcel my aunt gave the Abbey was verbal, not written, and therefore ours to place elsewhere. I argue the signed will is sufficient. Neither argument includes a missing room. Yet here we are. Here we are, I echoed. And how did you get from there to here so fast? Marcus called me, she said, glancing at Caedmon. He said one of the monks bolted to a detective in New York. He'd set someone to watch the Abbey, and the watcher watched a taxi. I'd rather not have Marcus people framing the story before it's true. Wolfe's lips pressed together, which for him is an exclamation point. So we have watchers watching watchers. Brother Caedmon, your friend who admires my work, is not unique. Caedmon showed a shade of discomfort. We wish to avoid the police. Wolfe waved a hand. Your wish is presently compatible with mine. Miss Vale, what did your aunt tell you of the Abbey? She called it a place that remembers how to be quiet. Caro's voice thinned for the first time. When she was ill, she asked to have some days there. She said it mattered that the world forgot her where the world forgot itself. Poetic, I said. Any reason she'd put a book in a red cloth cover and stare at bees on Tuesdays? Caro almost smiled. That was my aunt. She forgave stings and distrusted people who didn't. She left records, Wolfe asked. A diary? Not one you'll see, Caro said, brisk again. But I'll tell you what's useful if it keeps Marcus from shoving his foundation into the papers as a noble victim. The bell again. If the brownstone had feelings, it would have filed an injunction. I went, and this time collected a man shaped like a grant application. Crisp hair, tidy jaw, pitying eyes. He offered his own card like a mirror to Caro's. Marcus Vale, Aurelian Arts Foundation. Synchrony, I told him. We're fresh out of cookies, but come along. He entered with a cologne that was ambitious. When he saw Caro, he arranged his mouth into the smile people wear at probate. Cousin, he said. She didn't return it. You're fast. I dislike letting monks set narratives, he replied, and turned his polite beam on Wolfe. Mr. Wolfe, I admire efficiency. I assume your rate increases with the number of intruders. Put me down for my share. I want to know what the Abbey thinks it's hiding. Wolfe folded his hands across the equator of his vest, a sure sign he was passing motives like herbs. Miss Vale wishes discretion. You wish revelation. The Abbey wishes erasure. He shifted a finger. And I detest being used as a resting bar. No one intends, Marcus began. Prunes, Wolfe said. You intend precisely that. You and Miss Vale will not speak while I speak. Brother Caedmon, you will not appeal to heaven. Archie, you will take statements as to who visited the abbess in the last fortnight, and who knew of the silent room's schedule. You will ask for keys, locksmiths, carpenters, in the name of whoever cleans floors. Charmed, I said. Any other housekeeping? Yes, he said. The missing room is a melodramatic metaphor made literal. The simplest route to a vanished chamber is not through walls, but through minds. We shall proceed accordingly. He looked at the trio in turn, as if weighing their worth by the ounce. For now, the brownstone is closed. Miss Vale, Mr. Vale, you may send me your lists within the hour. Brother Caedmon will remain 10 minutes to answer what he omitted. After that, all of you will leave. Caro rose first, eyes on Marcus like a match near varnish. I'll send them, she said, and to me, quietly, make sure what you write is harder to twist than honey. Marcus gave a courteous half-bow to the room, and make sure it doesn't stick in the wrong places. They left together, which is a word that can mean anything. Wolfe watched the door close with a small grunt. There, he said, is the sanctity of my house demonstrated, corrupted. Tomorrow, I said, I'll get my shoes sticky. See that you do, he murmured. And Archie, when a room disappears, someone is advertising emptiness. I wish to know who paid for the advertisement. When I left the brownstone the next morning, the city was busy pretending it had never seen a monk, a missing room, or a man like Nero Wolfe. The air was crisp enough to make me glad I wasn't wearing a robe and sandals. I'd packed a fresh notebook, 2 pencils, and the conviction that if the Abbey of St. Paracletus wanted to remain silent, I'd make it talk. The cab ride north took 2 hours, and the driver filled it with the kind of commentary that makes you wonder if cab companies have a policy against introspection. By the time the hills came into view, my ears needed a monastery. The abbey sat behind stone walls, high enough to discourage both sin and curiosity. The gate opened after a pause that suggested internal debate, and Brother Caedmon appeared. Same coat, same deliberate calm. His face didn't show surprise that I'd actually come, which either meant he expected professionalism or divine inevitability. Inside, the abbey smelled of beeswax, wet stone, and the kind of silence that has texture. The corridors were lined with plain wooden crosses and unframed photographs of fields. Caedmon led me to a small office occupied by a man with spectacles and an expression like vinegar diluted with duty. He introduced himself as Brother Simon, steward of the abbey. We keep simple records, he said, unlocking a drawer. Brother Matthew's duties, purchases, and deliveries are noted here. You may examine them. The records were tidy. Too tidy. Every entry looked like it had been written by the same careful hand. Purchases of candles, beeswax, and cleaning supplies, all in the monk's name, all accounted for. There was nothing resembling motive, guilt, or even individuality. Wolfe would have called it an artificial perfection, which is his polite way of saying someone edited the truth. I pocketed a mental note and shifted the topic. Who else had keys to the silent room? I asked. Only Brother Matthew, Simon said. And myself. I glanced at Caedmon, who stood like an upright question mark. That makes 2 people, I said. If the room vanished, one of you unlocked it. Or someone used a copy, Simon snapped. That's a possibility, I said. But if the room was sealed from the inside, someone knew what they were doing. Simon's nostrils flared. You think we are liars. I think you are monks, I said pleasantly. Lying isn't your specialty, but omissions. You've got a vow for that. Caedmon gave me a look that was halfway between reproach and amusement, and I took the hint. I changed the subject to Brother Matthew. They told me he was cheerful, devoted, and peculiarly attached to the bees, which might mean anything from apiculture to theology. No one had seen him since the night before the room was discovered empty. His bed was made, his robe folded, and his sandals missing. It had the clean precision of disappearance by design. We walked to the garden where he kept the hives. The air was alive with the steady hum of bees, a sound that's half serenity, half warning. Caedmon pointed to an empty space among the hives. He called that one St. Ambrose, he said. It was his favorite. It is gone. I crouched to study the patch of earth. The grass was bent, not cut. Something heavy had been dragged, but not far. There were faint wheel marks leading toward a path that wound behind the chapel. I followed them until they faded into gravel. The gravel ended near a small door at the base of the chapel wall. It was locked, but the metal was freshly scratched around the keyhole. Caedmon noticed my interest. "That leads to the silent room," he said quietly. "The one that doesn't exist anymore," I reminded him. He inclined his head. "We keep the faith that it will return." "That's optimistic," I said. "Most missing rooms end up in the same place as missing people, wherever the lies are stored." Back in the main hall, I asked to see the other brothers. Most of them were unhelpfully polite. One, Brother Leon, avoided my eyes and spoke in single syllables, which made him instantly interesting. When I mentioned Brother Matthew, his lips pressed together hard enough to make a sound. "You didn't like him," I said. "He disturbed the order," Leon replied. "He questioned why we must remain silent when deceit lives in silence too." That was the kind of line Wolfe would savor like aged cheese. I jotted it down. "He say that recently?" "The night before he vanished," Leon said. "He had argued with Brother Simon." "About what?" Leon hesitated, then murmured, "Money." Now that was better than incense. I didn't press him further. When a monk volunteers gossip, you take the miracle and don't demand seconds. By noon, I had notes enough to fill a sermon. Before leaving, I stopped at the chapel. The door to the silent room was sealed again, boards nailed across like a symbolic apology. But there was something odd. A faint scent of honey mixed with something sharper. Varnish, maybe, or polish. Someone had tried to scrub the air clean. When I returned to the city, Wolfe was in the plant rooms tending to his orchids, which meant he was brooding with chlorophyll. He listened while I gave my report, only interrupting once to say, "You are certain the drag marks were fresh?" "As fresh as Fritz's biscuits," I said. "Someone moved something heavy out of that garden in the last 48 hours. Maybe a hive, maybe a crate." "Or a man," Wolfe said, closing his eyes. "You think they carted Matthew off like a shipment of honey?" "I think," he said, "that the Abbey cultivates silence as both crop and weapon. The question is which brother first tasted the poison." He leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded. "Archie, tomorrow you will call on Miss Caro Vale and her cousin. Find out what they imagine the Abbey conceals. What treasure, document, or confession might lie within a vanished room." I nodded. "And if they both pretend ignorance?" He opened his eyes and smiled slightly. "Then, my dear Archie, we shall conclude that one of them is finally telling the truth." The next morning I found Wolfe in his chair, motionless except for the faint tilt of his head that meant his brain was already 4 moves ahead of breakfast. The orchids had done their duty. Now it was time for mine. Fritz had set out eggs with tarragon, which for Wolfe was the equivalent of a starter pistol. He was already dissecting the details I'd brought back from the Abbey, so when I mentioned calling on the Vales, he waved a hand like a man brushing away redundant oxygen. "Go first to Miss Vale," he said. "Women tell the truth more quickly when they believe they are concealing it." That was Wolfe's brand of gallantry. I took it to mean she was likely to give me something useful before realizing she had. I arrived at her office around 10. The building was sleek, the kind that tries to disguise money as minimalism. Her secretary, a sharp brunette with the attention span of a stopwatch, informed me Miss Vale was in conference but might have 5 minutes. I told her I'd wait and made sure she saw me making myself comfortable, which usually shortens the waiting. When Caro Vale appeared, she was all business again. No tremor from yesterday's tension. "You're efficient, Mr. Goodwin," she said, sitting behind a desk that probably knew state secrets. "I thought Mr. Wolfe's type preferred armchairs to legwork." "Division of labor," I told her. "He thinks I sweat. It keeps the world balanced." She smiled briefly, then turned serious. "Have you found Brother Matthew?" "Not yet, but I did find out he argued about money with the steward. Any idea what a monk would have to argue about?" Her fingers traced the edge of a file. "Monks aren't saints, Mr. Goodwin. That abbey has more debts than prayers. My aunt's bequest came with stipulations: maintenance of the land, restoration of the chapel, and some mysterious project called the Record of Silence. I don't know what it is, but they were desperate to fund it. The Record of Silence, I repeated. That sound like scripture or bookkeeping? Both, she said. And if the abbey loses that land, they lose the funding, which means someone might have tried to hide whatever proof ties my aunt's bequest to it. That could make a room vanish, I said. Or a man. She met my eyes then, and there was something in her expression that wasn't just business, something personal, sharp-edged. Marcus thinks I'm protecting them, she said quietly. But I'm protecting her. My aunt believed in that place. I won't have it turned into a scandal for his gallery fund. That was my cue to leave before she started trusting me, which never ends well. I thanked her, promised discretion, and went to find Cousin Marcus. His foundation occupied a top floor in a glass tower, which is fitting. Men who live on reflection usually prefer altitude. He received me with a smile you could frame. "Archie Goodwin," he said, "your reputation precedes you. You're Wolfe's eyes, aren't you?" "And occasionally his voice," I said. "Depends on how much he's had for lunch." He laughed politely. "My cousin likes to play the moralist, but there's a great deal of money involved here. My aunt's land would complete our sculpture garden expansion. It was her dream long before she discovered piety." "Maybe she discovered both," I said, "and left the choice to time." His smile didn't change. "Time doesn't sign deeds. Tell me, do you believe in coincidences?" "Not professionally," I said. "Good. Then you'll appreciate this. Brother Matthew was once an art student. He left the foundation 5 years ago after some kind of disagreement over an exhibit. He took vows not long after. Imagine my surprise when I learned he was the one caring for my aunt's bees." "That's a neat circle," I said. "Maybe too neat." He nodded slowly. "If you find him, ask what he did with her sketchbook. My aunt kept drawings of every place she loved. One was the silent room. I'd pay to have it back." "Why not ask the monks?" "I did. They claim it was never there. And yet she showed it to me once. Red cloth cover, a little worn. That snapped things into alignment. I didn't let it show, but the mention of that red cloth was enough to make me want to phone Wolfe before the elevator reached the ground floor. I didn't. Wolfe doesn't like phone interruptions unless the house is on fire or the beer is warm." Back at the brownstone, I found him with Saul Panza, always a sign things were tightening. Saul sat across from Wolfe, taking quiet notes while Wolfe dictated like a general adjusting artillery. I handed Wolfe my report and stood by while he read it in silence. When he finished, he set it down and looked at me. "The red book again," he said. "You will recall Miss Vale's account matched the nephew's word precisely. Too precisely." "Either they rehearsed it," I said, "or it's real." "Or both," he murmured. "Saul, you will go to the Public Records Office. The Abbey's deed, Miss Vale's will, and any supplements. I expect forgery or misdirection, perhaps under the name The Record of Silence." Saul nodded and left. Wolfe turned to me. "You will return to the Abbey tomorrow. Bring a camera. There is an architectural curiosity, an anachronism. If a room was sealed from within and then found absent, its boundaries remain. Measure them. And if I find the boundaries don't fit, then someone built illusion upon geometry," he said. "And that is the work of an artist." He leaned back, fingertips pressed together, eyes half closed in that smug symphony of deduction. "Archie, the monks did not lose a room. They concealed an object inside it, a work, perhaps, or a document too damning to destroy. Our missing brother Matthew likely attempted to save it, and someone else succeeded in saving themselves instead." I nodded. "And you think the Vales are in on it?" "One of them, certainly." "But which one?" he said. Depends on whether greed speaks louder than grief. He opened his eyes. Tomorrow, we begin to listen. I got back to the Abbey around 9 the next morning, and the place looked the same as before. Calm, harmless, and about as innocent as a poker table before the cards are dealt. Brother Caedmon met me at the gate, his expression exactly as tranquil as yesterday's, which meant either nothing had happened or something had, and he didn't plan to tell me until I earned it. He led me toward the chapel, where a pair of younger monks were sweeping the walk as if eternity depended on it. I had the camera slung around my neck and a tape measure in my coat pocket, per Wolfe's orders. A monk with a measuring tape doesn't belong anywhere outside a parable, but it was too late for dignity. "The silent room," Caedmon said, stopping at the nailed door. "I must remain here while you work. Our rules forbid solitude in the sealed space." "Fine," I said, "as long as your rules don't forbid me from using the flash." Inside, the air was cool, still carrying that faint varnish and honey scent I'd noticed before. The floorboards were too clean, newly sanded by the look of them, and there were shallow marks along the edges of the wall where something rectangular had once been fixed. I started taking photos from each corner. The lens caught details I hadn't seen by eye. Uneven seams near the back wall, a hairline split where the plaster didn't quite match the rest. "Brother Caedmon," I said, crouching near it. "This wall, when was it redone?" He hesitated before answering. 2 months ago. Repairs. Moisture damage." "Who did the repairs?" "One of the brothers, Brother Leon. The same Leon who'd told me about the argument. That earned a mental underline." "Any reason the silent room needed patching before it vanished?" "No," he said. "But Brother Leon insisted the structure was weakening. We have no architect." "That's convenient." I pressed gently against the plaster. It sounded hollow. "Got a hammer?" He looked scandalized. "You intend to strike the wall?" "Only if it deserves it," I said. "Don't worry, I'll be polite." He fetched a small mallet from somewhere, and I tapped along the lower edge. The fourth hit gave a muffled thud, the kind you get from a false panel. I pried at it with a pocket knife, and after a few careful nudges, the plaster gave way. Behind it, hidden in the hollow, was a shallow recess, about 3 feet high, and inside that, a rolled bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. Caedmon whispered a prayer I didn't recognize. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a book, red cloth cover, frayed at the corners. The pages smelled faintly of honey and old dust. "Your silent room wasn't missing," I said. "It was misfiled." Caedmon crossed himself. "That is the record of silence." It wasn't a thick book, but each page was filled with handwritten text and sketches, notes in neat, deliberate script, drawings of rooms, bees, even symbols I didn't recognize. I turned one page and froze. There, sketched in graphite, was a face I'd seen before. Lydia Vale. Below it, an inscription read, "That the spirit may dwell where sound has no dominion." "Brother Matthew kept this?" I asked. "Yes. It was his duty to maintain the record," Caedmon said quietly. "He said Miss Vale's gift should not be buried under money." "Maybe that's what got him buried," I muttered. I rewrapped the book carefully and handed it to him. "No one else touches this. Not the steward, not Brother Leon. You bring it to Wolfe's brownstone tonight, alone. Tell the gatekeeper it's for Mr. Wolfe's eyes." He hesitated. "Brother Simon will forbid it." "Then don't tell him," I said. "He's already on the suspect list." When I left, I could feel eyes on me from a window, Leon's probably. He had the same discreet curiosity as a cat watching a bird. I took a few more photos of the chapel exterior, then headed back to town before they could remember that monks have locks. By the time I reached the brownstone, Wolfe was halfway through his midday beer. I put the camera and the developed film on his desk. He studied the photos in silence while I gave him the play-by-play. When I got to the part about the hidden recess, his eyebrows rose a quarter inch, which in Wolfen language meant, "We have progress." "The record," he said, turning one photo toward the light. "Bound in red, the color of concealment masquerading as revelation. Excellent." "Brother Caedmon's bringing it tonight," I said, "assuming he doesn't get ambushed by his choir." "He will arrive," Wolfe said. "Fanatics rarely break their word, they only redefine it." Saul came in then, carrying a folder thick enough to mean something. Wolfe motioned him to sit. "The deed?" "Forged editions," Saul said. 2, maybe 3 layers of revision. The latest claims the land includes an additional quarter-acre labeled Extension of the Meditation Wing. That edition was filed 6 weeks ago by someone using a notary who no longer exists. Wolfe grunted, which was as close as he got to swearing. "The same interval in which the wall was repaired," he said. "So, a false boundary on the paper, a false wall in stone. The symmetry is too graceful to be chance." "Which means?" I asked. "Someone concealed more than a book," he said. "That room was designed as a vault. The record may prove the fraud, or it may describe something worth hiding for its own sake. Perhaps a confession. We shall see." The doorbell rang just before 9. Fritz admitted Brother Caedmon, cloak damp from rain, the red book clutched like a relic. Wolfe gestured to the chair across from him. "You have kept your word," Wolfe said. "I could not do otherwise," the monk replied. "But I fear Brother Simon suspects." Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "Let him. Truth is an affliction best shared. Archie, prepare the dictation pad. Tomorrow we shall invite our entire congregation, the abbey, the Vales, and anyone else who has worshipped at the altar of silence. The brownstone will serve as our chapel." Caedmon looked uneasy. "And if the truth condemns us all?" Wolfe's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Then we shall consider ourselves absolved by exposure. Nothing remains silent forever, brother." He reached for the red book and opened it with deliberate care, as if turning not pages, but locks. "And this," he murmured, "is the key." Wolfe turned the first page as though it were a witness under oath. The handwriting was small and disciplined, each line evenly spaced, as if silence itself had dictated the pen. I stood by, notebook ready, but he didn't speak at once. When he finally did, his voice was quiet enough to make the rain against the windows sound intrusive. "Miss Vale's hand," he said. "The script is feminine, confident, with the habits of an educated recluse. And the ink varies. Some entries are older, some quite recent." He tilted the book slightly toward the lamp. The sketches on the first few pages were of the abbey's grounds, the chapel, the orchard, the hives. One corner drawing caught my eye, a narrow stair descending behind the altar wall, labeled "The Inner Quiet." Wolfe's forefinger tapped it twice, which meant he'd found his direction. "Brother Matthew maintained this," he murmured. "But the author is Miss Vale. Her later entries speak of a gift sealed in devotion." Archie read the next section aloud. I did. The words were sparse and deliberate. "When the voices cease, truth will remain in the stone. Let those who would buy holiness find only echoes." Wolfe shut the book, and for a long time he didn't move. Then he leaned back, eyes closed. "Someone has already found it," he said. "Found what?" "The gift. Something Miss Vale concealed within the abbey. A deed, a confession, a relic. Whatever it was, it tied her fortune to silence. And someone broke that covenant for profit. The record of silence was both map and warning. Brother Matthew must have realized its worth, and for that, he became inconvenient. I didn't need a flow chart to see where that led. So Simon or Leon found the stash, faked the repairs, walled the place up again, and made Matthew vanish. "Possibly," Wolfe said, "but the Vales complicate it. Miss Vale wants discretion. Her cousin wants exposure. They both knew of the Red Book. Neither seemed surprised by its existence, meaning one of them already knew what it contained. Precisely. He reached for the bell and summoned Fritz for more beer. Tomorrow evening we will host our congregation here. Until then, I must think. You, Archie, will keep the book in the safe. Under lock and vow, I said, and took it upstairs. I locked it in the small wall safe behind the file cabinet, made sure the dial spun clean, and returned just as the phone rang. Wolfe raised a brow at me, so I answered. A male voice said, "Tell Mr. Wolfe to give me what he found, or there'll be another room missing." Then the line went dead. I hung up slow. That, I said, was not an admirer of your orchids. Wolfe didn't react, except for the narrowing of his eyes. Describe the voice. Calm, low, city diction. Could be Marcus Vale playing mysterious, or a monk who's been practicing vows. Saul is following the legal trail, Wolfe said. You will follow the human one. Visit Miss Vale again, discreetly. If she denies knowledge of any call, I'll know who placed it. Caro Vale opened her apartment door herself, wearing the kind of composure people put on when they've already decided not to tell the truth. Mr. Goodwin, she said, you should know my cousin left town this afternoon. Left as in took a trip, or left as in vanished like a monk. He said he was going to Albany for a meeting with his lawyers. I received the message an hour ago, before or after you called Mr. Wolfe. She blinked. I didn't call Mr. Wolfe. That was confirmation enough. You should check your locks, I said, turning to go. Someone's making silent rooms in more than one place. When I got back to the brownstone, the mood had thickened. Wolfe had been in the office all afternoon, dictating letters he didn't intend to send. His way of thinking aloud. The Red Book lay open again on the desk, and next to it was an envelope Fritz had just brought in. It had no return address. Wolfe gestured for me to open it. Inside was a single sheet torn from a ledger, covered in familiar handwriting. Brother Simon's neat, dry script. It was a list of monetary transfers, small sums, all labeled renovation expenses, and one final line that stood out, delivery to Aurelian Foundation, 4 crates. Crates, I said. As in, plural. Could be art shipments, could be bees. Or, Wolfe said softly, whatever Miss Vale concealed under the altar. The foundation is Marcus Vale's domain. 4 crates delivered under the guise of restoration, shortly before the silent room disappeared. That tied it together like string around a package, tight but not yet opened. So Matthew saw the deliveries, protested, and got himself erased. Undoubtedly, Wolfe said, the crates contained whatever was sealed within the inner quiet. Marcus Vale intended to sell it or display it under his foundation's name. The record was his obstacle. He either bribed or blackmailed Brother Simon and Brother Leon to cooperate. Then why the phone call? I asked. If he already had what he wanted. Wolfe cut me off. Because he did not get everything. The book was missing. Without it, he cannot prove ownership. Worse, it names the Abbey's complicity. He fears exposure. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming like dark amber. We shall oblige him. Tomorrow evening we invite the entire circle. Miss Vale, Mr. Vale if he returns, the steward, Brother Leon, Brother Caedmon. Saul will bring the official deed copies. The record will rest upon this desk. I will conduct the inquiry. I nodded. And the police? Inspector Kramer will be outside the door, he said, until I tell him to enter. I prefer to have law as punctuation, not prose. That night I locked the house, twice, and sat up in my room with a revolver on the nightstand, reading the record again. The words seemed to hum, some lines like prayers, some like warnings. Near the end, there was an entry I hadn't noticed before, written in a hand shakier than the rest. When the bees abandon the hive, it is not the honey they fear, but the keeper. I didn't sleep much after that. Morning came grey and tense, the kind of sky that looked undecided about whether to rain or merely threaten. Wolfe was already in his chair when I came down, looking like the architect of inevitability. The red book sat on the desk in front of him, closed again, as if its silence might speak louder that way. Fritz had served breakfast, untouched except for the coffee. That meant Wolfe was thinking, not eating, which for him was a state just shy of divine possession. "We will receive them at 8, he said without preamble. "Saul will have returned by then with confirmation on the crate manifests. Kramer will wait in the kitchen until summoned." "Kramer in the kitchen," I said. "That's optimistic. He'll want a front-row seat." "Then he may watch from the doorway, like Cerberus guarding the threshold of common sense," Wolfe replied. "The sequence must be deliberate. First the brothers, then Miss Vale, then her cousin, if he dares attend." I knew better than to interrupt when he was diagramming fate. Still, one question itched. Suppose Marcus doesn't show. He's got every reason to run. "He won't," Wolfe said. "His vanity won't allow it. The guilty often crave a stage to justify themselves. This one will find his waiting." The rest of the day passed with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Saul came by mid-afternoon with the documents. The crates, he reported, had been sent from the Abbey to a warehouse registered under the Aurelian Foundation's name. Their contents were labeled "Restored Artifacts." The signature on the delivery slips matched Brother Simon's handwriting. That was all Wolfe needed to tighten the knot. By 7:30, the brownstone was prepared. Fritz arranged the chairs in their ritual semicircle. The globe gleamed, the orchids glowed faintly in their glass temple, and Wolfe's desk had been cleared except for the red book and a single glass of beer. Wolfe sat behind it like a tribunal of one. At 8 sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brother Caedmon and Brother Simon together, both in their black habits, their faces as different as stone and paper. Behind them came Brother Leon, his eyes darting like a guilty metronome. Miss Caro Vale arrived next, calm as frost, her coat collar turned up like armor. The only empty chair was the one Wolfe had reserved for Marcus Vale. "Please be seated," Wolfe said, as if presiding over a court already in session. His voice carried the weight of inevitability. "We are here to exhume a silence that has outlived its sanctity." They obeyed without protest, though Brother Simon's lips tightened as if he'd bitten into something bitter. I took my usual position near the globe, observer, recorder, occasional referee. Wolfe began mildly. "Brother Simon, you authorized the renovations that sealed the silent room. You signed for the removal of 4 crates. Explain." Simon folded his hands, the picture of piety. "The Abbey required restoration funds. The crates contained furnishings and relics no longer essential to our worship. They were loaned to the Aurelian Foundation for safekeeping." Wolfe's tone didn't change. "And the payment you received?" Simon hesitated. "A donation. From Mr. Marcus Vale," Wolfe said. "An exchange disguised as almsgiving. You bartered sanctity for property. The record of silence," he gestured to the book, "was the last testament of Miss Lydia Vale. It affirmed the Abbey's right to the land, but forbade its sale or profane use. By removing it, you ensured her bequest could be exploited. The missing brother Matthew discovered your deceit." Simon's composure faltered. "You cannot know that." "I can infer it," Wolfe said. "Brother Leon assisted you. He repaired the wall, concealed the recess, and believed the secret buried. But Brother Matthew confronted you, and in the confrontation he was silenced. Whether by accident or design, I shall presently determine." Leon's face went as pale as candle wax. "I didn't kill him," he blurted. "He fell. He tried to stop us opening the room, and he fell. Simon said we would hide it, that no one would believe us otherwise." Caedmon drew a sharp breath. "You murdered." "Enough," Wolfe said, raising a hand. "The corpse will speak for itself soon enough. The crates were then delivered to Mr. Vale, who sought to authenticate their contents. Among them was Miss Vale's diary, this book, which Brother Simon thought destroyed. When Mr. Vale learned it was missing, he made his call to me last night, threatening retribution. The symmetry of his crime displeased him. 4 crates out, 1 book unaccounted for. Caro Vale had been silent until then. "If you're accusing Marcus of conspiracy," she said, voice steady, "I'll need more than inference." "You shall have demonstration," Wolfe said. "Archie, if you please." I went to the hall door and opened it. Marcus Vale stood there, pale but composed, a faint smile fixed like varnish. Behind him, Inspector Kramer loomed, arms folded, face unreadable. Marcus entered without prompting. "You have my attention, Mr. Wolfe." "Excellent," Wolfe said. "You paid for the removal of the Abbey's contents. You sought to claim Miss Vale's legacy through acquisition rather than inheritance. The only obstacle was this record, which you could neither destroy nor forge. It speaks too plainly." Marcus spread his hands. "You're imaginative, but you can't prove I knew anything about a missing monk." "I need not," Wolfe replied. "Your associates can. Brother Leon's confession has already implicated you, and Saul Panzer has retrieved the bills of lading from the warehouse. They name you as consignee, not the Foundation. You used your cousin's trust to legitimize theft." Caro Vale rose abruptly. "You mean he used me?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "He relied on your discretion to keep the matter quiet while he converted sanctity into capital. Unfortunately for him, greed cannot abide stillness. It demanded motion, 1 crate too many, 1 death too soon." Marcus's face hardened. "You have nothing admissible." Wolfe leaned forward slightly, which for him was equal to shouting. "You are mistaken. Inspector Kramer, the documents, the confession, and the record together suffice for any competent prosecutor. But I have no wish to encroach upon the state's prerogative. You may proceed." Kramer stepped forward, expression grimly satisfied. "Marcus Vale, you're coming with me, and you, Brother Simon, stay handy." Marcus started to protest, but Caro spoke first. "Don't," she said softly. "You've said enough." Kramer led him out. The door closed. Silence fell, not monastic but cleansing. Wolfe exhaled slowly and reached for his beer. "Brother Caedmon," he said, "your abbey will require new stewardship. Honesty is poor masonry, but it lasts." Caedmon bowed. "We will atone." When they'd gone, Wolfe sat back, eyes half closed. "Archie," he said, "kindly remove the record from my sight. I've endured enough sanctity for 1 lifetime." "Where to?" I asked. "To the district attorney via Kramer," he said. "It belongs with the living, not the devout." I closed the safe again that night, empty except for air and faint echoes. Wolfe finished his beer, sighed, and muttered, "There is nothing more corruptible than virtue-seeking profit. Even silence, when bought, makes noise." I said, "Amen," and meant it. The next day began with a rain that didn't fall so much as linger, thin, cold, and indecisive. The brownstone felt heavier than usual, as if silence itself had settled in to pay rent. Fritz was in the kitchen, probably muttering over eggs. The smell drifted faintly down the hall, competing with the odor of damp wool from the coats I'd hung the night before. Wolfe was at his desk again, which was hardly surprising. What was surprising was the red book still sitting there. He hadn't sent it off to Kramer as promised. It lay open now, pages spread like a crime revisited. He didn't look up when I came in. "Kramer already has enough to hang Marcus Vale," I said. "What's left? Spiritual closure." "Don't provoke me before coffee," he murmured. Then, after a long pause, he added, "There's a discrepancy." That word in Wolfe's mouth is like thunder on the horizon. "Where?" I asked. He pointed to the page where Miss Vale's sketches began to thin into text again, simple lines of handwriting that almost shimmered under the lamplight. "When the room is unmade, The voice will return. Beneath it, faint pencil marks had been erased and overwritten. Wolfe had shaded the page slightly with the side of a pencil to reveal them. They formed a signature. Brother Matthew. He made an addition, Wolfe said. A message. Look at the hand. It trembles. He wrote it quickly under duress. The record we exposed was not complete. You think there's something else hidden? I think, he said slowly, that Brother Matthew left something unsaid, a final correction to Miss Vale's gift. The question is whether he left it in the Abbey or sent it elsewhere. His instinct was preservation, not revelation. I was already reaching for my coat. You want me to go back? Briefly, Wolfe said. Find Brother Caedmon. Ask whether anything else was removed from the silent room before it was sealed. Papers, objects, relics. If there was, I want it here before the authorities make a museum of the place. I left before he could reconsider his own rare impulse toward exercise. The Abbey looked worse in rain. The walls, darkened by moisture, seemed to sweat guilt. Brother Caedmon met me at the gate, his face tired, eyes clouded but still steady. Mr. Goodwin, he said, we have had visitors, inspectors from the county. They questioned Brother Simon until dawn. Good, I said. Let them sing duets. But I need to ask you something. When the silent room was emptied, did Brother Matthew remove anything? Documents, relics, a box, maybe? Caedmon hesitated, then nodded slowly. There was a small chest, cedar wood, bound with brass. He carried it to the garden 2 days before he vanished. He said it contained Miss Vale's last offering to the Abbey, a symbol of her vow. Where's that chest now? We never found it. That was enough to stir the itch of Wolfe's intuition in my own head. Did the bees act up that week? I asked suddenly. He blinked at the question, then frowned, considering. Yes. Brother Matthew said the hives had become restless. He moved them to the orchard, then stopped tending them entirely. We thought he was ill. I looked toward the orchard through the rain. Show me. We walked to the hives, half submerged in mist. There were rows of them, pale boxes like gravestones. The air carried that strange sweetness of honey mixed with damp rot. Something about it prickled. I crouched near one of the outer hives and saw, in the mud just below the wooden lip, a piece of tarnished brass. I pried it loose with my knife. It was a hinge, ornate, old, and stained with resin. The chest, I said. He buried it. Caedmon's breath quickened. Then he meant to hide it from us. Or for someone else to find, I said. Let's get a spade. It took an hour to dig it out. Small, soaked, and smelling faintly of wax. The cedar had held up well enough to keep its contents intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of papers, sealed with red wax. The seal bore Miss Vale's initials, intertwined with a single B, engraved finely. Caedmon stared as if afraid to breathe. What does it mean? It means Wolfe was right, I said, and maybe Brother Matthew's conscience is about to get him posthumously canonized. When I got back to the brownstone, dripping and mud-splotched, Wolfe didn't look up from the globe he'd been rotating lazily with one finger, but when I set the chest on the desk, his eyes flickered with interest. You persist in violating the dignity of my floors, he said mildly. Charge it to archaeology, I told him, and handed him the bundle. He examined the seal for a long moment, then broke it. Inside were letters, half a dozen, written by Miss Vale to her lawyer and to the Abbey's prior, all dated after the will. They outlined a separate donation, an anonymous fund to sustain the Abbey's silence indefinitely, provided that no property, art, or material relics of her life were ever sold. The final codicil, Wolfe said almost to himself, her last amendment. Without these, the will's stipulations were incomplete, allowing Marcus to contest the bequest. And with them, the Abbey owns nothing that can be sold, Wolfe said. Every object taken from it is now contraband. The proceeds fraudulent. Marcus Vale's art empire will collapse under restitution. He leaned back, satisfied, but there was something colder in his expression than triumph. Brother Matthew preserved more than her vow. He preserved the abbey's corruption from profit. And died for it, I said. Yes, Wolfe murmured. He died for silence, not the kind imposed by rule, but the kind chosen by integrity. There is a difference, though men rarely know it. He reached for the bell, summoned Fritz for beer, then looked at me. Archie, you will deliver these to Inspector Kramer at once. Tell him to append them to the Vale file, and then we shall dine. Anything special? He considered. Trout in brown butter. Symbolic resurrection. I left him there, leaning back, eyes closed, as if already carving the morale into eternity. The rain had stopped when I stepped outside, but the air still smelled of damp stone and beeswax, faint and clean. I couldn't help thinking about Brother Matthew, his quiet defiance, his last scrawl hidden under erasure. When I came back later, Wolfe was reading again from the record, lips moving faintly in what for him might have passed as reverence. He didn't look up as I passed, but he said softly, almost to himself, "Even in silence the just will speak, the rest only hum." I didn't answer. I just turned out the hall light and left him to his thoughts, the red book glowing faintly under the lamp. Final testimony to a room that had never really vanished, only waited to be heard. By the following afternoon, the case should have been finished. Marcus Vale was under arrest. The abbey's name was halfway through the papers, and Kramer was busy writing reports thick enough to choke a filing clerk. But Wolfe was still in that taut state of stillness that meant he hadn't yet pushed all the pieces into place. He sat behind his desk, fingertips touching, eyes hooded. The red book lay open again, beside Miss Vale's sealed letters. Fritz had just brought in a tray of sliced peaches and brandy, which Wolfe ignored, a signal that the puzzle was still breathing somewhere in the dark. I knew the signs. When Wolfe refused food, there was either unfinished business or an error in his own mind, and Wolfe hated errors even more than exercise. You've saved an abbey, nailed a con man, and given Kramer a week's worth of paperwork, I said. If that's not closure, what is? He didn't move. The arithmetic doesn't balance, he said. Try me. He gestured toward the record, still open to the page where Brother Matthew's shaky hand had scrawled its cryptic addendum. A man who hides truth does not append a confession. He left that line. When the room is unmade, the voice will return. As a cipher, not sentiment, something remains unmade. Meaning what? Meaning, Archie, that the silent room was not the only silence. He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Fetch me the photograph you took of the interior before you disturbed the recess. I got it from the cabinet and laid it on the desk. He studied it for a minute, tracing a line along the far wall with one finger. You see that seam? He said. The plaster line above the baseboard. Sure. I saw it when I took the picture. You figured it was just part of the false panel. No, the geometry is wrong. It's half an inch too high for the supposed floor level of the adjoining chamber. There was another recess, one you didn't find. I stared at him. You think there's another hiding place? Unquestionably. The first was a decoy, Brother Matthew's final misdirection. He gave us the book to lead us to the second. That was his true voice. Before I could argue, the phone rang. I picked it up, half expecting Kramer, but the voice wasn't his. It was Saul Panzer's, low and level as always. I was checking the warehouse inventory again, he said. You might want to tell Wolfe one crate was miscounted. There should have been 4 in total, but the record lists 5. I looked at Wolfe, who was already listening. Saul, you're sure? Absolutely. The 5th crate was labeled Private Collection, Return only to sender. And it's gone. Gone? Vanished between the warehouse and police impound. The night Marcus Vale was arrested. I hung up. Wolfe's eyes had narrowed to points of amber. The fifth crate, he said softly. Miss Vale's legacy had one more vessel. Then somebody else is playing collector. He nodded once. And it will not be Marcus Vale. He's been in custody since dawn, therefore, Brother Simon. But Simon's still under questioning at the Abbey. Wolfe smiled faintly. Do you imagine monks do their own transport? Simon had help, a secular accomplice. Fetch Miss Caro Vale. It took an hour to reach her apartment. She looked pale, but less brittle than before. When I told her what Saul had found, her face tightened. You think Simon's taken another of my aunt's relics? I think he took something worth more than any relic, I said. You told Wolfe your aunt never kept art, right? Nothing valuable, no hidden masterpieces. She loathed art, she said. Marcus used to tease her for it. She said beauty belonged to silence. That line rang a bell in my head. And she meant it literally. Her eyes flickered. What do you mean? Let's find out. We drove back to the brownstone together. Wolfe was waiting, massive and immovable, as if he'd spent the hour compressing the world into clarity. When Miss Vale entered, he inclined his head slightly, a gesture of courtesy he usually reserved for royalty or rare wine. Your aunt, he began, was both artist and ascetic. She despised art because it captured the world instead of releasing it. But she did, in her final years, attempt one work, one that fused her beliefs and her guilt. The record mentions a gift sealed in devotion. We assumed that gift was the book. It was not. It was the room itself. Caro frowned. I don't understand. She built it, Wolfe said, with her own funds, a chamber of absolute silence. Its walls were layered with beeswax and cedar, materials chosen to absorb sound. But more than that, she painted those walls, not scenes, but color, texture, layers upon layers. It was her final canvas, one meant never to be seen. The ultimate paradox, a work of art dedicated to erasing perception. He paused, letting that sink in. Brother Simon, and later your cousin, realized its worth once they learned of its existence. They tore it apart to sell its panels as abstract art under false provenance. That is why 4 crates were shipped. The 5th contained the last panel, the central one Miss Vale called the Voice of Silence. Brother Simon removed it for himself, believing it to hold mystical power, or, more likely, profit. Caro's voice was barely a whisper. And my aunt, she knew. She knew what they would do, Wolfe said. That is why she added the codicil and entrusted the record to Brother Matthew. He tried to protect the secret but was too late. His final message was both confession and clue. When the room is unmade, the voice will return. He meant her creation would speak once it was desecrated. Caro stared at the red book, eyes glistening. Then it's all gone. Not entirely, Wolfe said. Saul will find the missing crate. I've already given him its trail, but what matters is the meaning. Miss Vale succeeded, you see. Her art fulfilled its purpose. It silenced greed. It swallowed it whole. He leaned back, finally reaching for his brandy. Archie, you will inform Inspector Kramer that another recovery is imminent. Miss Vale will act as custodian for the Abbey's holdings. I have no patience for ecclesiastical litigation. Caro rose slowly. I think my aunt would have liked you, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe's eyes half closed. She would not. She preferred devotion to reason. She smiled faintly and left. When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled as though releasing an entire monastery. That completes it, I said. A room turned painting, a painting turned confession, and silence turned profitable. He gave me a sideways glance. Archie, you mistake profit for consequence. Miss Vale's creation was not destroyed. It was transferred. Every man who tried to claim it was consumed by the same silence he sought to sell. That is art of the highest order. He sipped his brandy, eyes distant. There is, I think, a peculiar symmetry in it. The devout sought to hoard holiness, the profane sought to market it. Both are now quiet, and that, my dear Archie, is a conclusion even I can approve. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the room fall still. For once, even I didn't feel like breaking it. The brownstone silence felt earned, an echo of a vanished chamber and a voice that no longer needed to be found. The next morning brought the kind of sunlight New York saves for its brief moments of mercy, warm, filtered, and faintly apologetic. The brownstone had regained its peace, that rare equilibrium which only returns when both justice and routine have been fed. Fritz was humming softly in the kitchen, the smell of baked apples drifting through the hall. For once, I didn't mind being awake early. Wolfe was in his chair, naturally, surrounded by the morning papers. They'd done their usual job of missing the point. The headlines read, "Art fraud ring broken, millionaire and monk accused." Not a word about Brother Matthew, the man who died for truth in silence. The rest of the column was as dry as the paper it was printed on. Wolfe had already folded it neatly and moved on to his orchids, which are the only living things in New York that never talk back. I poured myself coffee and waited him out. Eventually he said, "The world insists on misunderstanding simplicity. Miss Vale created silence, and they all mistook it for treasure. They could not comprehend a gift that gave nothing to anyone. That's the trouble with your kind of art, Wolfe. It doesn't come with price tags." He grunted. "Bah, price is a symptom. Value is an affliction." He turned a page of the newspaper with the same disdain he might show to a bad omelette. Kramer telephoned earlier. Saul recovered the 5th crate last night. It was hidden in a freight terminal in Yonkers. Inside, one cedar panel, coated in wax and ochre. A single word carved faintly into the wood. Peace. "That's poetic," I said. "Even Kramer might have to respect that." "He will call it evidence," Wolfe said. "The state will call it restitution, and the Abbey will call it a miracle. But in fact, it is only a woman's last attempt to silence men who cannot bear quiet." I let that settle while Fritz brought in the eggs and trout. Wolfe's chosen meal of moral closure. He ate in silence, though I could tell from the rhythm of his fork that his thoughts were still pacing somewhere deeper than the conversation. When he finally spoke again, it was without looking up. "You may record this, Archie, if you wish. I find religious men rarely understand faith, and worldly men never understand art. Only those who refuse both seem to grasp what silence means." "Sure," I said, "but it doesn't make much noise in the papers." He gave me a look sharp enough to carve bread. "You crave attention as others crave sugar. There is satisfaction enough in comprehension." "Easy for you to say," I said. "You get comprehension 3 times before lunch. The rest of us have to work for it." He sighed. Long, theatrical, and very much alive. "Then work, if you must. Write your report. I shall have none of this sentimental embroidery you favor. Facts only." I grinned. "You'll get the facts, boss. Whether you like the adjectives is a different matter." He ignored me, of course, turning back to his orchids. The conversation was over, replaced by the rustle of paper and the quiet rhythm of trimming shears. The world had righted itself in that peculiar Wolfian way. Intellect restored, appetite satisfied, and human folly catalogued for future contempt. Still, as I watched him, I couldn't shake the faint echo of the Abbey, the hum of bees in the wet air, the smell of cedar and wax, the feeling of sound swallowed whole. A man had died to keep that silence intact, and another had tried to sell it. Between them stood a detective who never moved, and a monk who couldn't stop seeking. The case had ended neatly, as they always do in Wolfe's world, but it had left a residue, the kind that doesn't wash off with logic. Before heading out for a stroll, I said, You know, there's one part of this that doesn't add up. Only one, he said dryly. Yeah. Miss Vale built a room that erased sound, right? But her words and Matthew's are still being heard. Maybe silence isn't what she thought it was. Wolfe paused, his eyes lifting briefly from the orchids. Perhaps not. Perhaps silence is simply truth too profound for words. He went back to pruning, and that was the last of it. I took the hint and left him to his sanctum. Outside, the city was awake and noisy as ever. Horns, vendors, footsteps, life doing its best to drown itself out. But for once, I didn't mind the clamor. The noise was honest, at least, and I figured Miss Vale might have approved of that. By the time I hit the corner, I glanced back at the brownstone's windows. Behind them, Wolfe would already be back to his orchids, Fritz to his kitchen, and the world to its infinite chatter. As for me, I decided a little noise wasn't the worst thing. Someone had to carry the story of the silent room after all, and Wolfe sure as hell wasn't going to. So I did what I always do. I started writing.